What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Sitting with Sean Extraordinary, episode 11. I took a short break from doing Extraordinary. I had some life events, so I decided that I needed to take a short little break. But we are back, and today I have an awesome guest. His name is Ralph Sarchie. How you doing today, Ralph?
Hi, Sean. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
Well, thank you for being on, man. Thank you for being on. I gotta admit, like right off the bat, this is like kind of like a fangirl moment for me, man. I've been a fan of yours for a hot minute now, and I've seen a lot of the work that you've done, and we'll go into that a little bit later on. But I'm really excited to have you on the show and to be present and be in this moment with you, man.
Thanks again, Sean.
How was your day, man?
Very good. Uneventful.
Yeah,
I like uneventful days.
yeah. Those some of those days are always the best ones.
Especially
Yeah.
at this stage of the game, I'll take them all I can get.
Definitely, definitely, man, definitely. So,
Yeah.
so Ralph, you're from the Bronx, yeah?
No, actually, I'm
No?
from Queens. I'm
Oh,
from Queens,
Queens.
New York. Yeah, I
Okay,
worked in the Bronx.
okay, okay. What is it? What is it like there? I've never been like in New York or New York City. What's that like?
Uh, Big town. Lots of building, lots of people, lots of things going on. I don't think that I was ever in Manhattan in the city
Hmm.
where there weren't any sirens going off somewhere, constantly hearing sirens. So now I'm living in Florida and I don't hear any sirens and I love it. I don't want to hear sirens anymore.
Yeah, it's
New
that
York,
peace.
that's what you'll hear.
Whew.
But cuisine, they got great cuisine in New York. Uh, it's got character, but it's sort of offset by all of the misery that's going on in Manhattan also. You know,
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. What is your favorite meal? If you had to pick one favorite meal from New York, period.
my favorite meal from New York: cheeseburgers.
I would not have guessed that.
Yeah, cheeseburgers.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Can't
Anything
get
special that goes on it?
no, just straight up plain cheeseburger. Nobody,
Nice,
no
nice.
one has ever asked me that question before.
Hey, well, it's a first for everything. It's a first for everything.
I when I first met with Jerry Bruckheimer,
Hmm.
we had met at this fancy restaurant in the East Village, and I ordered a cheeseburger. So, I didn't order a filet mignon or lobster tails. I ordered a cheeseburger. That's what I prefer.
What was his reaction to that?
Nothing
Nothing.
really. I don't think he really cared.
Well, that's good.
I'm sure.
That's
I'm sure
good.
it was a real expensive cheeseburger though.
$55 cheeseburger for
In
what?
the East Village, I wouldn't doubt it. We're in the East Village now.
Yeah.
You're going to pay when you
Whew.
go and dine in the East Village.
Wow. Wow. That's yeah. Like I said, I've never been to New York. My dad was a truck driver. I went on a run with him up through New York, but never stopped by.
Well,
And
you're
that's
from where? Ohio?
no.
Oh,
Well, so I live in West Virginia. Oh, I don't
okay.
live in West Virginia. I'm originally from West Virginia, but I live in Alaska.
Okay. And you made the trip.
Yeah, so I came down to West Virginia to visit family for the holidays, and then I'm going right back up to the cold.
All right. Well, if that's what you like, I'm staying right here in the warmth. All right. Florida. I'll deal with alligators, bugs, snakes, whatever the heck, bears, whatever else. As long as it's warm, I'll be all right. You know?
Definitely, definitely, definitely. So one of the first things I wanted to talk to you about and like ask you about is you were a police officer for 18 years, correct?
20.
20,
Yeah.
20. What made you want to become a police officer?
Well, I was not good enough to become a major league baseball player. So the next thing for me was, the police department. I had gone to John Jay College of Criminal Justice, not only to play baseball for the baseball team, but to also get an education that would support me in a possible law enforcement career.
Okay. All right. I have to say I have a deep deep respect for the police officers and for any first responders. So I want to say right here right now, thank you for what you did to protect and serve your
Sure.
community.
You know, it wasn't a picnic, but I had a good time because of the men and women that were around me that I worked with every night. Um, that's that's what made work going into work worthwhile. Actually, was your squad or the squads that you're going to be working with for that evening. So there was a lot of fond memories, and there were a lot of bad ones too. That's life.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely understand that. What would an average day look like for you when you were in the office or when you were working?
I didn't work in any offices unless I was in trouble. Then they put me in the office, and I did a couple of years combined with that stuff. But I was on the street my whole 20. When I went to the 4-6 as a sergeant, and I pretty much stepped into special operations. I ran the conditions team, and that's exactly what I did. Me and my team, I had about 4 cops with me. We went and we targeted whatever um, condition was deemed by the commanding officer. Like, say we had a rash of burglaries, he would say, "I want you to go out there and stop these burglaries or robberies or drugs, prostitution, whatever it was. You know, the wide spectrum." So I had a captain ask me one night, tell me to go give some stop sign summonses. There was a stop sign in the precinct that just happened to. There were a lot of accidents
Hmm.
surrounding it, so before we went on patrol, we stopped over there to get a couple of summonses and get make the captain happy. First car we pulled over. Long story short, the guy was wanted for homicide in Rochester, New York. So it was just that one little stop. He didn't stop. He kept going. So we chased him. He bailed out. We foot chased him, and we got him. And
Wow.
when we checked him out, he was wanted for a homicide and a manslaughter charge. So it's that type of thing. The little what the I can't remember the name. What we called them. These types of crimes. They what they got us the ability to clean up the city, and we did a pretty good job of cleaning up New York City. And then there's a certain political party that came and took over and undone all of that in a short matter of years. So, quality of life. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
can imagine
these
that's pretty
quality of
frustrating.
life situations that we got involved in actually was what cleaned that whole city up, and it was a man named Jack Maples that instituted that. He was Giuliani's right hand man, and it was Jack Maples that came up with this policy, and it worked.
Yeah, I can imagine that's pretty frustrating cleaning the streets up and then something happens that's out of your guys' control and then all that power or not power necessarily but all of that responsibility is kind of taken away from you guys.
Well, they paid me real good to do it though, so
Yeah.
it wasn't total waste.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we made it possible for at least a few years in the city where people can pretty much go out and know that they're not going to get hurt or feel a lot safer than they are these days, I should say. Because in New York, anything can happen at any time. It's just the way it is.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So might be a little sensitive subject, but 9/11. Where were you at on 9/11?
Oh, geez, 9/11. I was home. I was doing for at that time I was working 6 at night to 2 in the morning. and I was getting a phone line put into my office, a second line put into my house, and the repairman just happened to say, "Hey, a plane flew into the World Trade Center," and I know that there's not supposed to be any air traffic around the trade center, so I put the TV on, and just as I turned it on, I saw that second plane hit, and I knew we had a problem. So I said, "You got to leave,"
Yeah.
and he left the house. Um, I called my command. They said, "Get in. We're under attack." So I hung up, jumped in my car, and I went. I went into um, to the 4-6,
Yeah.
and for that evening, I stayed in the 4-6. Somebody still had to patrol the area, and my commanding officer said, he says, "Hey, listen, we got to keep some of you guys here because these a-holes are going to realize that all the cops are down there and it's going to be open season, so we need a presence." And my unit was the unit that was chosen, so we made the presence. A couple of days later, I had gone down there, and that was something that I will never forget. I can visualize it. You know,
Yeah.
I can still smell it.
Yeah.
Actually, that horrible smell.
Yeah.
So it was. I spent about 14 hours down on Avenue C and I believe 14th Street directing traffic. I had 8 police officers with me, and they were state troopers, and they were responsible for directing the traffic. And then about 1 o'clock in the morning, my lieutenant rolled up and said, "There's going to be a bus pulling up. Get you and all your people on it and down at the ground zero." So we got on the bus, and there were no lights, so I nobody knew where we were going. We were just doing a lot of turns, and it was a regular city bus, and there was no lights. Like I said, there was no lights. So we get off the bus, and I could see the glow of the fire because I was only a block away from the center. There was a McDonald's. That was the first thing I saw with all the windows blown out, and there was about a foot of um, dust on the floor. And when you walked on it, it just kicked up. It was all of the plasterboard and cement that was made up of the World Trade Center came down. So it was all over the street. And I remember it started to rain. Just everybody's luck.
Yeah. Yeah.
My luck, everybody's luck. So we get into the McDonald's, and I'm trying to roll call my guys. I want to make sure everybody's with me, and I had a couple guys missing, which immediately got me a little mad. They were going to get ripped up when I saw them, but they came back with rain gear and coverings for the boots, and so they didn't get yelled at. They went out and they got stuff for the squad,
Mm.
to protect ourselves from the rain. And I said, "Okay, guys, let's go. Everybody stays with on me." We walked in. I had no direction at this point. So we walked in, we looked that's the first time I saw Ground Zero. And the only thing that I can think of is that now I know what the people in England must have felt like, you know,
Yeah.
um, because there was total destruction down there. And then finally we got set up, and we got put on one of the perimeters. We had to keep the whole perimeter secure, and there was a lot of workers and activity. They were every time they would find a body or a body part, everything would come to a stop. We would salute. They would police escort the body or the body part out of ground zero. Eventually, they made a morgue on ground zero so they could just bring everything over right to that morgue. Um, so it was a very surreal, um, situation.
Yeah.
But we had a
That's
job to do, so we did it.
yeah. Oh, that's that's rough. I can I can definitely understand. I can imagine how traumatizing that would have been. to be there and to see some of that stuff. It's something that no human being should have to see.
Well, they were, I'll tell you, I was standing there right on the corner, and here come two English police officers from around the corner, two Bobbies. I saw police officers from all over the world.
Wow.
Plenty of canine units, military canine units. There were military units all over the place. Um, so it was an atrocity. It happened, and we can't forget it.
Yeah.
Can't allow it to happen again, and we can only move on. You got to move
Absolutely.
on, and
Absolutely.
we always do as a country. We've always moved on, and we've been stronger because of
Yep.
it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So moving on. Um, what got you into demonology and wanting to be a demonologist?
Boy, when you switch gears, I mean, you just switch gears and just go right through it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
well, I always had an interest in the paranormal when I was a kid.
Hmm.
So I read a lot of books. I read a lot of military books. I read books about policemen and firemen. I was a student I still am, history, especially in the warfare department. Um, so I would read a lot. I was an avid reader. I don't read too much these days, but back in those years, I was very much an avid reader, and I kept reading over the years about Ed and Lorraine Warren. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
them.
Yep.
So it was a number of years that I continued reading and studying the subject without really any desire to get involved in it. I was a police officer. I was busy with that, and I was living life, and it wasn't until I had my first daughter, Christina. I got married, and I had my daughter,
Hmm.
and I happened to come across a book called Saint's Harvest in a bookstore, and I was on vacation, so I bought the book and I read it in one night from cover to cover, and I decided after I read that book that I was going to contact Ed and Lorraine, and I did that. And I spoke to Lorraine for about 45 minutes, and Ed was in Newfoundland at the time, so
Hmm.
I spoke to Lorraine, and I asked her to send me some literature, whatever she had, and I gave her my address. And when I gave her my address, she said, "Ralph, wait a minute, I'll be right back. Something's going on. I gotta go. I'll be right back." So I'm sitting there. I'm like, "What the hell?" You know, that's
Yeah.
not what I wanted to hear from Lorraine Warren. That something strange is going on. So
Yeah.
she comes back. She says, "We have a man, Joe Forrester. He
Hmm.
lives in New York. He works with us from time to time. Maybe you'd like to reach out to him." So I'm like, "Sure. Give me his information." She gave me his address and his phone number. He lived 2 blocks away from where I was sitting, you know,
Wow.
in all of New York. Now, I wrote about this in Deliver Us from Evil.
Yeah.
Um, so I said, "Lorraine," I said, "he doesn't just live in New York. He lives 2 blocks away from me." She's like, "All right, then you need to contact this man." So I did. I contacted Joe, and
Yeah.
we became friends, and I became friends with the Warrens. And it wasn't before long that I was going on investigations, going up to their classes, and it got me involved in the work, actually. And I became friends with Bishop McKenna, and I assisted him in numerous exorcisms over the years. And also Father Malachi Martin was another one, priest that I was introduced to, and I became friends with, and they became my mentors. Father Martin, Bishop McKenna, they inspired me the most out of pretty much anybody that I ever met.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine, some of the people that you surrounded yourself with, and just the knowledge and being able to absorb all that knowledge from some of the top investigators in the world. It's
You
pretty
better
awesome.
believe it. You better
Yeah.
believe it. It was a good time. It was a different time. Things are a lot different than they are today. The technology that a lot of investigators are using, we didn't have access to that. So um, I never really did my investigations around that. Spirit boxes and REM pods and Gauss meters. We had Gauss meters back in the time that I was working, but that they were expensive. Nobody had them and we were probably I wouldn't have used it anyway.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
my investigations were always of a religious nature. Even when I was investigating with the Warrens, I was the one that had the holy water, the blessed incense, and I had all that. I had all of that for sacrifice. So that's predominantly the way I investigate is religiously.
Nice. Nice. There's I've heard many different stories about the Warrens and about what kind of people they were. What like from your perspective, what kind of people were they at heart?
Well, they like to surround themselves with people.
Yeah.
You know, um, there was always a lot of people, and of course they wanted to have their classes, and it was a way that they made their way through this life. Um, on a personal level, I was real close to Ed. Ed was he had a very funny sense of humor. Ed Warren. A lot of people that know him will know that. Constantly laughing, a lot of goofing off and things of that nature. So it wasn't always like demons and ghosts and
Yeah.
we had a lot of time where we had some fun. You
Yeah.
know, and Lorraine was always the business minded. She was always straight and narrow with the business, and Ed was always goofing off. So it was a good balance.
Yeah.
And they were they were generous people. And I remember spending Thanksgiving with Ed and Lorraine in Connecticut, with my ex-wife and my oldest daughter Christina. My youngest one wasn't even born yet, so we had spent Thanksgiving with them. So they were at my first daughter Christina's first birthday. So we did more than just investigations. We were on a friend basis.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. That's awesome. One of the things I find truly remarkable about the paranormal field, like you were saying, it's ever changing and more different forms of investigations and stuff like that. But I find that people when they step into those roles, they really step into the role of the caring and nurturing kind, right? Not just especially if there's like a demon, you want to care for the person that you're trying to help out and deliver from that, but you also care for the people that are around you, and that's what I find so fascinating. Is that there's a deep sense of caring. You could just look at the person and be like, oh, whatever, it's not my problem.
No, I agree, and that's you see that's been my argument, um, pretty much with paranormal teams that are all over the United States that go into abandoned buildings and things of that nature. I mean that's just plain dangerous, to do that because you don't know what you're communicating with. Half of them they don't believe in the demonic. You know, they don't believe that there's any danger of attracting an evil spirit in to follow them home, and they will do that if God allows it.
Yeah.
And there's the other investigator that actually goes into families and try to make sense of what's going on and help families. But the problem is that when you do that and you go in there purely scientifically, you have no way of bringing the case to fruition and actually helping the family. And what I found is most of the time you make things worse because when you're dealing with a demonic spirit, they do not like people meddling with their prey. If you can possibly take them away from them, they don't like that. That you're a threat to them, and they will try to stop you from doing it by using any means necessary. If they could kill you, they would do it. God does
Yeah.
not allow them to operate like that, and that's why we can do what we do. Being protected, but you have to do it from a pure intention. If you're in there looking to make money off these people, that's not a pure intention. Chances are you'll not be successful if you attempt to drive out a demonic spirit and you put yourself and your team in a very precarious and dangerous situation. So those are the two distinctions that I make as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
These abandoned buildings. Look, I get it. It's fun. I like I said, I had a lot of fun investigating cases with Ed and Lorraine. So I understand that the camaraderie, the friendships you build up. You know, um, there was never a case that we dealt with that we didn't go and eat afterwards. You know,
Hmm.
especially if there was an exorcism. We would be fasting for that day. If it was a solemn exorcism of a person, we were fasting for 3 days now. That's the Black Fast. So when we were done, the first thing we did when we left is we looked for a place to eat.
Yeah.
I remember when we were filming the Demon Files, and we had finished up with the Pennsylvania case. It was the last case that we did.
Hmm.
We left that house around 2, 3 in the morning. So we were driving and we were fasting because that was the day that there would be an exorcism done
Yeah.
in the house. So the whole team fasted. I hope they weren't sneaking food because if I would have caught them, they would have been in deep shit, man. But so when we left there, it was like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning, and everything was dark. We didn't know where we were going, so I'm like, just make a right and keep going. So we were driving. All of a sudden, we see a big light. And as we're driving, we get closer. We see this big Denny's sign. So we're like, "Oh yeah!" It was like a miracle. So we drove over there and we busted into that place at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we ate like it was 6 o'clock in the evening. So it was fun. You know.
That's yeah, that's pretty awesome. Going back to what you said about like going into abandoned buildings and stuff, and some of the actual investigators that go out and do that stuff. I watch it for fun. I watch a lot of those like Ghost Adventures and all these other stuff. And after every episode, I look at my wife. I'm like, they potentially made that situation worse for the family or for that establishment because you don't know what you're making contact with. You could make contact with, you know, a malevolent spirit, a demon, um, something that could potentially harm somebody, and you've just put other people at risk for what?
Well, especially if you go in there and you burn sage.
Yeah,
You know, that you can put on your turkey during Christmas time. That's about all it's worth. It's not worth anything else. This ceremony of smudging is a pagan ceremony. How do you expect to use pagan practices to cast out a demonic spirit?
yeah,
You know how when Jesus was mocked by the Pharisee and they said he's of the devil, and
yeah,
Jesus says, "How can the devil cast out the devil? A house divided by itself cannot stand." So evil is not going to cast out evil.
yeah.
It can't divide itself like that. Even though
There,
Lucifer or the devil doesn't have any loyalties to anything, and that includes the fallen angels, he has no loyalty to anyone.
yeah,
A prideful being does not have that type of a mindset towards other people. They always have to be on top, and they'll squash anybody to get there.
yeah,
So, you use these pagan practices, it's going to anger the demon because what you're ultimately trying to do is cast it out.
yeah,
So they don't like that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Um,
That's why I look at a lot of people that try and go about this on their own and cleanse their house or themselves on their own, and I say you shouldn't be messing with that. You don't have the idea of what you're doing.
Well, I don't like the term or use the term cleansing.
Yeah.
I don't use it. I don't use deliverance. It's exorcism. That's it. That's what Catholics. That's the ritual they perform is an exorcism. It's not a deliverance. And even if it's a minor form, it's still a minor exorcism.
Yeah.
Um, and for anybody, any person, any Catholic who is in a state of grace, who goes to mass at least every Sunday, which is a holy day obligation, who observes the fast every Friday throughout the whole year, you know, has the authority against the demonic. If you pray the rosary, now you've added another layer of spiritual warfare on top of that. So, for a Catholic living that type of lifestyle, you can use the sacramentals, the holy water. I have a bottle of holy water always here. I always have a bottle of holy water present and ready to go. You know, from time to time, I take out the blessed incense, the blessed salt, and I give the house an exorcism.
Yeah.
A negative spirit vibration does build up, especially in a household that's not praying, and the people are in a state of sin. Like a constant state of mortal sin. I'm not talking about someone who's working on their spirituality constantly and is fighting the battle,
Hmm.
because there are so many different battlefields when it comes to dealing with the devil and the demonic.
I I would have to agree with you on that. I would have to agree with you on that. What would you say is was the most intense case that you've ever been on?
Well, there were a few of them. I couldn't really single one of them out as being worse than the other, because they're all. But it's not every exorcism. It's we would have exorcisms that we would have no manifestations, no phenomenon taking place. It's more of a battle of wills completely. And then there were cases that we would have where we would have a demonic spirit that would um, be along the lines of what I call the brute. They didn't speak during the exorcism. They basically just grunted and growled. They made animal sounds, and it was pure violence. So I'd have to say that struggling in a pew for 2 hours with a 90-pound woman, trying to control her and stop from being scratched and bitten, and she can get her teeth near you, she was going to remove flesh from you. It was just the way it was. And it was in and out. The demon would retreat and then come back, and it would be violence, and then the demon would retreat and it would come back, and there would be extreme violence. So this would go on for 2 hours. So things of that nature. You also are going to see a lot of suffering during those periods. A lot of time, what you're seeing actually is the suffering of the demonic, and not the suffering of the ecstasy, the person possessed.
Mm.
So you have to make that distinction. The exorcist needs to make that distinction, because when you get a demonic spirit to that point in the exorcism, then the priest has to double up on that, and really go after that demon. It's the only time that a priest is allowed to not show mercy to a creature of God is during an exorcism.
Yeah. I've never heard it put that way. That's pretty awesome. Pretty awesome to hear. I'm not saying pretty awesome like as in and when it's
No, I get
happening.
you. I'm tracking. I get you.
Yeah, yeah. Um, What are some common misconceptions that you may hear from other people about their beliefs when it comes to exorcisms?
Um, well, I what I can tell you is the difference between an exorcism and a deliverance.
Okay.
I actually use when I have an audience that I can play audio for. I'll let them hear the difference between a deliverance and a religious provocation and the responses. In the, what I've recognized in deliverance is that they're more of a petition to God. It's a prayer to God to intervene, intercede, and help this person out and remove what's afflicting this person. With exorcism, it's a direct confrontation, it's a command, it's not a prayer. Although we do petition God with the litany of the saints, is what the Roman ritual of exorcism starts with. That's where a priest intones every saint to pray for us and to assist us in the prayers of exorcism. But when the priest actually approaches the person, there is a direct confrontation. The exorcist is directly speaking to the demon when a Protestant minister is speaking directly to God or speaking to God. You follow what I'm saying?
Yep,
So
definitely.
that would be the difference in my experience from what I've seen. You
Okay.
know, now I was friends with M. Scott Peck. I don't know if you know who M. Scott Peck is.
No, can't say I
M.
do.
Scott Peck is a pretty well known psychiatrist, but he was also a
Okay.
pretty well known deliverance minister. He was a Protestant. I was in his house with Bishop McKenna and Father Kumaraswamy, assisting them in exorcism on two of, M. Scott Peck's parishioners. So, you know, we've helped countless Protestants over the years. Bishop McKenna
Yeah.
did not shy away from helping whoever came to him for help, whether he's Catholic or not.
Yeah.
So, I can understand why a lot of exorcists they don't want to help people outside of the Catholic faith because us Catholics believe that when we're baptized, we become members of the Catholic Church. If you've been baptized by a Protestant minister, you haven't been baptized into the Catholic faith. So a lot of exorcists will not take on demonic spirit due to that fact. Bishop McKenna was not one of them. Didn't matter who you were. I remember excising Jewish people. He didn't care.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I know that I've heard that where a lot of cases that involve demonic oppression or possession. The Catholic Church won't intervene because they weren't baptized under the Catholic religion or vice versa, and and I find it pretty amazing that there are people that will step in regardless because there is a common belief in God.
Well, God will always find the people to do what he needs to be done. The thing is that he'll never find a qualified person on earth.
Yeah,
So, it's God that does the qualifying.
yeah,
And that's, you see, that's what we're told by Jesus Christ in scripture is, is that we should not rejoice in the fact that the devil and his demons are subjected to us in Jesus' name, but we should rejoice that our names are written in the book of life. So we should not become all egotistical and cocky when dealing with this, with these types of creatures, because it's all the authority of Jesus Christ. And without that, we're impotent to do anything against the devil. But while we're with Jesus and we are deserving enough to use the authority of his name, the demonic cannot overcome us. He tells us, Jesus tells us that.
yeah, yeah,
So, and it's got nothing to do with being egotistical. It's that we know our place. We know who the King of Kings is, and that's who we serve, not ourselves. That's the way it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thing that I noticed was that um, it's coming around where people are starting to believe in the paranormal or the demonic. But I have this idea that if you believe in the existence of God, Jesus, and saints for the Catholic religion, you kind of have to believe in that the devil's real too, and that Satan's real, and because it's the counterbalance, right? Jesus didn't come on earth to save us from ourselves; came to save us from hell.
Well, God had always intended for Jesus to become a man. The incarnate word is the way God referred to him when he was revealing his plan to the angels, the angelic choirs, because that was all he created up to that point. He created the heavens, in the beginning, which is time. He created the heavens, space, and the earth, matter. So that's the time, space, matter continuum. The next thing he created were the angelic choirs, and he required them to go through a probation period, just like we did. Like we're going. This is a probation period for us. We to choose God or not. But God revealed some of his plan, and he revealed the incarnate word being born of a woman. And that's where Lucifer rebelled against God, because the plan of God was to have his son be worshipped by a lower creature, us human beings. And God commanded the angels to minister to us as lower creatures. And he also stated that the incarnate word and the woman would be elevated above them. And Lucifer didn't like this. He was prideful, and that's when he blasphemed against God. But the intention was for always for Jesus Christ to become a man and be worshipped by us. And through sin, Jesus had to hang on that cross now to satisfy his Father. So that it wasn't always intended that Jesus was going to come here to hang on that cross. He did because of our sinfulness.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it changed. It sort of changed the relationship between Jesus Christ and humanity as far as his divinity.
yeah,
Not only did original sin change what took place between God and man, it changed what the relationship between man and beast and beast, because there was no killing in paradise before sin. All the animals were sated; they lived in harmony. There was no prey. There was none of that. Man subsisted off of vegetables, fruits, and seeds. It wasn't only until we changed the relationship between us and God and us and the animals that we needed to hunt them in order to sustain ourselves. And the animals themselves needed to prey on one another to sustain themselves. So that original sin just did so much undoing of what God really intended for us. And it was never his fault, not for 1 second. It was our fault, it is our fault, and it will always be our fault. So when Jesus hung on that cross, he was blameless.
yeah,
He didn't have to. There was no stain of sin ever near him. The stain was ours, and he took and paid the price for that. You know, and eternal salvation is not free. You got to earn it. You can lose it.
yeah. Definitely, definitely. All right, and we're gonna switch gears real quick. One more time. One more time.
Go
I
ahead.
promise it shouldn't be so drastic this
Go
time.
ahead. It's all right. I was just teasing you. That's all.
So I want to talk about Deliver Us from Evil real quick.
The
I
book of the
see
movie.
the movie.
Okay.
So I I was I was looking online and I was on YouTube and I seen a trailer pop up. It said Deliver Us from Evil. I like paranormal movies and stuff like that. So I start watching the trailer. I'm like, holy crap, this looks really good. And then I actually go in, found it on Blu-ray, brought it home, watched it, and I was like, this was inspired by real events. Like I was mind blown because I don't really watch a lot of paranormal movies that are inspired by real events. And then I was like, okay, well, what's his name again? And I go back and now is Ralph Sarchie, and I was like, I'll go on Facebook and see if this man is real. And you were, and I was like, wow. So that's how I grew to find you and like start interacting with you, and we've had some interactions over the years. What was it like? Were you approached about the role, or not about the role, but about the movie, or did they pick up the book and say, "Oh, we want to turn this to a movie"?
Well, the time that the book came out, the my literary agent had simultaneously submitted it to Hollywood. He went to I'm not 100% sure who his contact was, um, and he had a contact with Jerry Bruckheimer, so he brought it to him because I believe at the time he was dealing with Buena Vista Motion Pictures, which was a video production company, and he brought it to Jerry because they needed major motion picture for that, so they brought it to him, and that's how it was optioned about. From the time that Deliver Us from Evil was made, they had optioned it 11 years earlier with Disney. So Disney had it and sat on it for 11 years.
Shame on Disney.
And they had no intentions of ever letting that thing be made a movie
Wow. Wow.
because, Disney's got their own problems. I don't want to go into that. I'm going to get angry.
Okay, let's not
Let's
get
not get
angry.
angry.
Let's not get angry.
Yeah.
Okay. What was it? Were you able to be a part of the process of them filming and like pointing things out, or was it
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
your
Oh,
hands?
yeah. They hired me as a police advisor, and I was on set every day,
Nice.
pretty much for every scene. There was police procedurals, and I had to be on the set to make sure. Because I told Scott, I said, "Listen, I want this. The police aspect has to be 100% on the money, right down to the uniforms, the jargon we use, even the locker room. That
Yeah.
locker when what was it, Nadler opens up. I did that. I designed that locker to be exactly the way a locker would be for a cop. That's how crazy I was. So that was my job, and that's what I did. You know.
I'm pretty sure like I know for me being a veteran, I look at military movies. I'm like, no. Was that you wanted to eliminate that possibility of people saying no? Yeah, and
And they
make it
still did it.
authentic.
They still did it. We had a screening for the NYPD,
Hmm.
and I was sitting next to one of my lieutenants. I was retired at the time, but he was one of my lieutenants. And when they were in the zoo and they split up,
Hmm.
he goes, "You guys are never gonna split up." I know. It had to be done for the movie. So I couldn't interfere with, you know, the movements of the characters unless it was something grievous and
Yeah.
unless it really had to be done the way it was done for that particular scene. But them splitting up in the Bronx Zoo, it would have never happened. Partners always stayed together. That's the rule, you know. But in
Def-
order for the scene to work, they had to split up. So there's nothing I could do about it. You
yeah.
know?
Yeah. That that yeah, that movie I have to say is one of my favorite, and I'm not saying this because you're here or any of that. That is one of my favorite movies that has to deal with possession of an individual. That and The Exorcism of Emily Rose, two of my favorite. And it's because it's based on real events and it's not over dramatized. I'm pretty sure Hollywood does that, but it's not over dramatized, and you got to keep your hands in it and kind of keep it on track versus letting it go in the
No,
right field.
no, no. If Scott was going to do what the vision he had in his mind, unless it was pointed out to him that it was stupid and it's not going to look well. Then he'd look at it and say, "Yeah, you're right. had,
Mm.
like I'll give you an example. It's not his fault. There was a with the scratching on the floor that Christina heard. The script had called for there's cement under there. There's no scratching from under there. So I said, Scott, that bedroom is on the second floor. Where there's cement. He goes, oh, geez, that's right. There wouldn't be any cement up under that floor. The cement would be under the first floor, but her
Yeah.
bedroom is on the second floor. So there's no cement. So, you know, so little things like that can happen to anybody, you know. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not making fun of him. It's just the way it went. You could see his thought process, but so it was like little things like that. But as far as I tried to get him to stop the scene where he threw the nightstick,
Yeah.
the stunt men were on me for that. And I'm like, listen, I don't know. I'll bring it up. And he got mad. He goes, oh, I like that. I saw it in Balloon. I like it. I'm like, yeah, okay. So the next day he sent me text message. Goes, how close did I come? I said, real close. I was gonna knock him out. I'm like, real close. He got me mad. So I walked away.
Yeah.
But that I knew Scott for years, so we were friends. It wasn't like he was somebody I didn't know and he didn't know me. He lived in my house for 4 days and before board me. So yeah, I had that ability to talk to him like that, and if he wanted it, it stayed. He was the boss. He
Yeah.
was the director, not me.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So before we shut it down, um, I want to ask you a question, and it's in regards to if somebody were looking into becoming a demonologist or looking into stepping into that realm, learning more, what advice or suggestions would you give them to help them along the way?
Well, the first thing you're going to need is a relationship with God. That's the first thing. I mean, whatever your faith is, whether you're a Catholic or a Protestant or a Jew for that matter, you better do what your faith prescribes. I prefer you approach it from the traditional Catholic point of view, but that's not my advice. My advice is you need a relationship with God. The closer to Him you are, the more protected and successful you'll be. And always make sure that the people around you, especially your spouse and your children, are baptized. Because the first thing the demonic is going to come after you with is your family, is your marriage. If you enter the work and you're truly a threat to the demonic, they're going to go after your marriage. They think nothing about terrorizing your children at 3 a.m. So if you're okay with that possibility of losing your family and having your kids deal with this kind of stuff, then by all means, you got to look for somebody reputable in the field to work with so they can train you. If not, get reading from a book, watching a couple of movies is not going to do it. You should be with somebody who's been involved in the field and has a good reputation. There's a lot of phonies out there. They'll say they're demonologists, but I know they're not. Just by listening to them speak, I don't know them personally, and I'll never reveal their names to anybody, and I'll never say anything to them negatively in public. But if they contact me privately, I'll tell them what I feel. I don't believe you should be, you know, um, using the title demonologist. You can mislead people and you can get them hurt, and that's the problem.
Definitely. Definitely. Is there are there any like courses that they could take through like a college or something like that? No.
I taught at Harper College for 2 semesters. It was non-matriculating. It was continuing education. That's the only college that I worked, for. I I developed my own curriculum. I teach my own classes. I offered them probably 2 years ago. It's been about 2 years since I've taught the classes again. I've been thinking about it. it's I teach those classes. I don't look for a fee. I look for a donation, and I don't care what the donation is. But I won't charge for that. But it is my time and it is my knowledge. So I do ask for donations.
Yeah,
Other than that, I don't deal with money when it comes to this work. This field.
absolutely.
Except
Yeah, you're spending knowledge and time, on people to help them along the way. That's it's got to be worth something.
well, I'd have to go up to Connecticut sometimes twice a month. And that was an expense for me, tolls, gas. So and the cases that I went on, it cost me money to get to them. I didn't take money from the people that call me for help, like families, the cases. I would not even take traveling expenses. No money changed hands when I went to investigate cases. And they were out of state. I'd be out there driving, and like I said, gas and tolls. And I got a young family at home, so a policeman's salary only went so far. So I feel like I done my sacrifices. I done my time, and if I want to charge a donation for my classes, I can charge a donation. I get so many people who are breaking my shoes over that. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, where are your classes? You teach your classes for free. You know,
yeah,
you know, telling me how to what I should do with my knowledge and my time and everything else. It
yeah.
boggles my mind, but that's okay.
You're not putting a standard fee out there. You're not throwing out there, five
Oh,
hundred
it's
dollars
a
for a
donation.
40-hour
Yeah,
course.
yeah. You can
That,
see. You should see what some of these people are offering. For how much money they're offering. It's not even anywhere near that. You know,
yeah,
so um,
yeah,
I don't even know if I'm going to do it yet. I have to feel passionate about it. I don't feel like I want to do that right now. Um, it might change in the future. Chances are it will. But I'll make an announcement on Facebook classes, and I'll do it that way.
awesome,
Yeah.
awesome. I'm always down to get more knowledge. So who knows? I might pop in
Well,
one of your classes.
I do a lot of live stuff on my Facebook page. Um, and I accept questions when I'm done, and I answer as many questions as I can. And people are looking for information. They're hungry out there. But it's most important to have a relationship with God than anything else.
Yeah, yeah. What's funny is I asked you that same question a few years ago. I said, "What would I have to do to become a demonologist?" And the first thing you said to me was, "Have a relationship with God." And I was so mad because I was like, "It's got to be something else." But that's honest. You have to have.
We had a conversation years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah. I had
Really?
asked you. Yeah, yeah. I
We
said
spoke on
I
the phone.
no over Facebook over Messenger.
Okay.
I'd sent you a message. I said, "Hey Ralph, I wanted to be a demonologist, or I was thinking about it. What would I have to do?" And you said, "Have a relationship with God." And I was so mad. I was like, "But there's got to be something else." And that's the starting. That's the foundation of everything.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and so I do respect that you said that right off the bat because a lot of people don't understand you have to have a foundation, a relationship, close relationship with God.
That's it.
So
I said it then, and I'll say it again, and I say it all the time. When people call me, with a problem with a case, that first conversation I'm going to have with you is I want to know where you are spiritually. I don't want to know about what's going on in your house. I don't want to know what's going on in the peripheral of your life or anything like that. The first thing I want to know is what do I have to work with here? You know, because my advice is going to be different for depending on what type of a response I get. If I get a Catholic that comes to me who's baptized Catholic, I'm going to direct them to go to their church, get holy water, get confession, go to communion, make sure you're in mass every Sunday, start praying the rosary. And once you've done that, then you start to use the sacramentals in your house. If people understood how easy it is to get rid of the demonic if you're in the right spiritual state, it, it's unbelievable. You know, these are very, very powerful beings we're talking about. A little puny guy like me can cast them out using the proper spiritual tools and being in the proper spiritual condition. The demonic can do nothing with you, and they know it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Ralph, I want to thank you for sitting here for this hour with me and talking to me. I had a blast. I had a good time.
It was fun, Sean. It was my pleasure.
And everybody, thanks for hanging out with us for this hour. Once again, Ralph, like I said, thank you for being here and hanging out with me, man. I really enjoyed the conversation, everything that we went through. So, till next time,
That's great.
guys, be good.